In the last episodes, we went to Genoa and the surrounding area. Today, we're going to get on the MSC Poesia. We're going to explore the facilities, the rooms, and the meals of this ship. Let's get started after the intro.
After several days traveling across Italy by land, I've finally arrived in Genoa. Over the next 2 days and 1 night, I'll be leaving solid ground behind and boarding the MSC Poesia for a Mediterranean cruise to Barcelona. But before I can step on board, there's one last thing to do: return the car. Unlike many cruise passengers who fly directly to their embarkation port, a lot of Mediterranean cruise travelers choose to explore Italy by car before joining their ship. And so, after several days on the road, my driving journey comes to an end here. After returning the car, I didn't take a taxi. Instead, I dragged my luggage into the Genoa metro. For many visitors, Genoa may be nothing more than another cruise port on the map. But for MSC, this city is home. The company was founded here in Genoa. And to this day, the city remains one of MSC's most important bases of operation. Before actually boarding the ship, there is still quite a bit of preparation to do. A few weeks before departure, MSC sends passengers an email inviting them to complete the online check-in process. In addition to your passport details, you'll also need to provide information for everyone traveling in your party. Once completed, you'll receive your boarding pass. And that boarding pass is arguably the single most important document for your cruise. Besides your personal details, it contains your embarkation time and, most importantly, your cabin number. Without it, you won't even be able to enter the secure area of the cruise terminal. At the terminal entrance, one of the first things staff check is your boarding pass. As for your larger luggage, it is usually handed over to port staff before you board. They will attach luggage tags based on the cabin number shown on your boarding pass, and the bags will then be delivered directly to your stateroom by the ship's crew. In other words, without a cabin number, not only would you be unable to board the ship, your luggage wouldn't know where to go either. With all the paperwork finally completed, it's time to head for the cruise terminal. The area you see in front of the camera, which looks remarkably like a hospital waiting room, is where passengers wait before check-in. Rows of chairs, and hundreds of travelers preparing to board. For a holiday that promises relaxation and enjoyment, the atmosphere before embarkation feels surprisingly similar to waiting for a government service. Passengers are called forward according to different boarding groups. The problem is that the announcements are made in a mixture of Italian, Spanish, and English. After listening to several rounds of announcements, I was no longer entirely sure whether they were calling my group or somebody else's. In the end, I adopted the most practical strategy. When other people stood up and joined the queue, I followed them. After all, we were all heading for the same ship. After several rounds of waiting, I finally reached the check-in counter. Staff checked my passport and boarding documents and took a photograph. That photo would later become part of the ship's identification system. Every time passengers leave the ship at a port or return on board, the system uses the photo to verify their identity. Once check-in was completed, there was still one final step: security screening. Luggage goes through an X-ray scanner. Passengers walk through a metal detector. The process is very similar to airport security. And after clearing security, the moment of embarkation had finally arrived.
The first thing to do after embarkations would be getting your cruise card. The arrangement of MSC is actually quite good. Your cruise card is hanged outside the door of your room. It's now time for room tour. So basically it's a inside cabin. So you can see the bed, and then the toilet, and a shower. They also have a small table for us. And basically, yeah, that's it for the room. A small room. They have a television, and under it is a mini bar, but it's not open for us since we just stay for 1 night. And then they have a wardrobe, sufficient for storage.
There is a tradition on cruise ships that has become increasingly rare in modern hotels. It's called turn-down service. While passengers are away enjoying dinner or watching a show, their cabin steward returns to the room, straightening the bed, emptying the bins, replacing towels, and preparing the cabin for the night ahead. This tradition dates back to the luxury hotels of 19th century Europe, where staff would prepare guests' rooms before bedtime. Although turn-down service has gradually disappeared from many land-based hotels, it continues to be preserved on many cruise ships today. After boarding the ship, the first order of business is, of course, finding something to eat. For most cruise passengers, the buffet is one of the places they will visit most frequently throughout the voyage. But while enjoying lunch, it's easy to overlook one important detail. What appears to be an ordinary buffet restaurant is actually serving thousands of meals at sea. On a full sailing, MSC Poesia can carry more than 3,000 passengers, along with nearly 1,000 crew members. That means every meal requires the preparation, storage, and service of food for several thousand people. This is not simply a restaurant. It is more like a floating dining operation in the middle of the ocean. And unlike a restaurant on land, everything has to function while the ship is constantly moving. There is also a practical reason why buffets have become such an important part of cruise culture. Efficiency. On embarkation day, thousands of passengers arrive within a relatively short period of time. If everyone were directed to a traditional sit-down restaurant, the entire system would quickly become overwhelmed. As a result, the buffet is usually one of the first dining venues to open. Whether you board at noon or later in the afternoon, there is almost always food available shortly after you arrive. For passengers, this may simply be the first meal of the holiday. For the cruise line, however, it is the result of a carefully coordinated logistical operation taking place behind the scenes. So what does all of this mean for us as passengers? Quite a lot, actually. When a cruise ship is preparing food for several thousand people every day, food safety becomes one of the highest priorities. Unlike a small restaurant, where many dishes can be cooked individually to order, cruise ships rely heavily on large-scale production systems. In many cases, ingredients are stored under refrigeration, prepared in advance, and then reheated in large industrial ovens before service. From a food safety perspective, this makes perfect sense. The process is highly controlled, temperatures can be carefully monitored, and the risk of foodborne illness is reduced. The downside, however, is that food prepared this way is not always particularly memorable. Safe? Usually yes. Consistent? Almost always. Exceptional? Not necessarily. That's why, on many cruise ships, some of the best dishes are often the simplest ones. On MSC, the pizza is made continuously throughout the day and served fresh from the oven. The pasta stations also prepare certain dishes to order rather than simply reheating pre-prepared meals. As a result, these tend to be among the most reliable options on board. Interestingly, desserts are a different story. Even in many high-end restaurants on land, cakes, pastries, and plated desserts are often prepared in advance rather than made individually for each customer. That means the production methods used on cruise ships are actually quite similar to those used by many luxury hotels and fine dining establishments. As a result, cruise ships can often deliver desserts that are surprisingly good, sometimes reaching a standard comparable to what you might expect from an upscale restaurant ashore. So while the buffet may not always offer the most exciting hot dishes, there are usually a few categories where cruise ships perform exceptionally well. Fresh pizza, simple pasta, and, perhaps most importantly, dessert.
The next thing we need to do is to go back to room to watch our safety videos and to follow the instruction on the cruise card to get to the assembly point for the safety demonstration.
When most people think about a shipwreck, they assume the biggest danger is drowning. Others believe that in cold seas, the main killer is hypothermia. But modern maritime medicine tells a more complicated story. In many cold water disasters, victims never live long enough to develop severe hypothermia. Instead, the first threats appear within minutes of entering the water. During the first minute after entering cold water, the greatest danger is not hypothermia. It is something called the cold shock response. When icy water suddenly contacts the skin, the body reacts violently. Most people experience an involuntary gasp reflex. If the head happens to be underwater at that moment, that single gasp may draw seawater directly into the lungs. At the same time, heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate increase dramatically. For people with underlying heart conditions, this response can even trigger fatal cardiac arrhythmias. That is why survival training teaches an important lesson. After falling into cold water, your first priority is not swimming. It is controlling your breathing. If a person survives the initial shock, they enter a second phase that far fewer people have heard of. Cold incapacitation. Cold water rapidly cools the arms and hands. The fingers are usually affected first. A victim may still be fully conscious, able to speak clearly, and understand everything happening around them. Yet they may no longer be able to perform simple tasks. They may struggle to hold a rope, operate a buckle, or climb a rescue ladder. Investigations into maritime accidents have repeatedly shown that many victims lose the ability to save themselves long before they lose consciousness. Only later does the danger most people recognize begin to dominate. Hypothermia. As the body's core temperature continues to fall, victims may experience intense shivering, poor judgment, confusion, drowsiness, and eventually unconsciousness. In severe cases, the heart may stop altogether. Hypothermia is undoubtedly dangerous, but in many cold water emergencies, it is not the first killer. Many passengers think a lifeboat is simply a floating platform. In reality, its most important function is much more basic: keeping people out of the water. Water conducts heat away from the body far faster than air. Even when wearing a life jacket, a A person immersed in cold water continues to lose body heat rapidly. A lifeboat provides protection from water, wind, and exposure, while also carrying emergency supplies and communication equipment. In maritime survival, staying dry is often just as important as staying afloat. Modern maritime safety is built around one surprisingly simple principle. Don't enter the water if you can avoid it. A life jacket helps prevent immediate drowning. A lifeboat helps keep you alive until rescue arrives. That is why every cruise ship conducts a mandatory safety drill before departure. Because in a real emergency, survival often begins long before anyone enters the sea. In the evening, I followed the instructions printed on my cruise card and arrived at my assigned main dining room, at my assigned time, and at my assigned table. Unlike the buffet during the day, this is a much more traditional style of cruise dining. Passengers are assigned to a fixed table, and the same waiters will usually look after them throughout the voyage. This system actually dates back to the great ocean liner era. And even today, it remains one of the traditions that many cruise lines continue to preserve. Compared with the buffet, the presentation here is noticeably more refined. And that is perhaps the main dining room's greatest strength. The goal is not necessarily to serve the most expensive ingredients, but to create a more formal dining experience through presentation, lighting, table service, and atmosphere. To be honest, if you compare it directly with a top-tier restaurant on land, it is not always operating at the same level. After all, even the food served in the main dining room still relies heavily on refrigerated ingredients and large-scale production in a central galley. The difference lies in how the food is prepared and served. Rather than producing large quantities of dishes in advance and placing them on a buffet line, the kitchen focuses on a relatively limited menu, prepared for a specific service at a specific time. As a result, the food spends less time waiting before it reaches the table. This is particularly noticeable with meat dishes, which are often significantly better than their buffet counterparts. The ingredients may be similar, but timing makes a remarkable difference. And in dining, sometimes the difference is enough.
After dinner, it was time for another cruise ship tradition, the theater show. Tonight's show is called Nature.
After the show, the ship's nightlife was only just beginning. Beyond the bars, casino, and live music venues, many passengers also spend time browsing the shops. And if you walk through the central atrium, you'll often notice something rather interesting. What was a spacious public area during the day suddenly becomes filled with temporary sales displays. Perfumes, watches, jewelry, sunglasses, and even electronic gadgets are all on sale. At times, it feels more like a department store promotion than a cruise ship. But these displays are far from random. They represent one of the cruise industry's most important sources of revenue. Many people assume that cruise lines make most of their money from ticket sales. In reality, the cruise fare is often just a way to get passengers on board. Much of the real profit comes from onboard spending, alcoholic drinks, specialty restaurants, the casino, shore excursions, and a wide range of retail products. The central atrium is usually one of the busiest areas on the ship. Every evening, thousands of passengers pass through on their way between dinner, the theater, bars, and other venues. For the cruise line, that makes it one of the most valuable retail locations on board. So when you see staff enthusiastically promoting perfumes, watches, or discounted products, they are selling more than just merchandise. They are trying to turn passengers' attention into another onboard purchase. Because for a cruise line, getting passengers onto the ship is only the first step. Getting them to spend money once they're on board is where the real business begins. One of my favorite places on any cruise ship is the lounges and bars with live music. There are venues of all kinds throughout the ship, but tonight I chose a bar where a singer was performing a selection of classic old songs. I ordered a martini, found a comfortable seat, and simply sat back and enjoyed the performance. On the dance floor, elderly couples swayed gently to the music. Some quietly sang along, while others simply enjoyed the evening in silence. Watching them move to melodies they had probably known for decades, it almost felt as if time itself had slowed down. Cruise ships never lack entertainment options, but the moments that stay with you are often the simplest ones. A martini, a few familiar songs, and watching people enjoy their own little moment of happiness. As the ship sailed slowly through the Mediterranean night, that was more than enough. It was a beautiful way to end the evening. Back in the cabin, I found that my steward had already left the disembarkation instructions for the following morning. Unlike a hotel stay, a cruise does not simply end when you wake up, pack your bags, and leave. Because thousands of passengers need to disembark within a relatively short period of time, the entire process is carefully organized. Along with the scheduled disembarkation time, the notice also included luggage tags. Passengers wishing to use the cruise line's luggage service are required to attach the tags to their larger suitcases and place them outside their cabin doors before 11 p.m. During the night, crew members collect the luggage and transport it to the terminal ashore. The following morning, passengers simply retrieve their bags from the luggage collection area using the tag number. As for passports, medications, electronic devices, and other valuables, these must remain with the passenger and be carried off the ship as hand luggage. The notice also contained another important deadline. All cabins must be vacated by 10 a.m. because just a few hours later, a new group of passengers will board the very same ship to begin their own journey. For travelers, this marks the end of a holiday. But for the ship and her crew, it is simply another turnaround day. As one group of passengers leaves, another is already waiting at the terminal to board. At the very moment one voyage ends, another is preparing to begin. Early the next morning, I made my way up to the open deck to watch the sunrise. The sea was still wrapped in darkness, and only a faint glow could be seen along the horizon. At that moment, I was reminded of Sunrise at Sea by the Chinese writer Ba Jin, a piece that many Chinese-speaking students encounter in primary school. As a child, I always found the descriptions somewhat abstract. After all, most people have seen a sunrise, but far fewer have watched one from the middle of the sea. Standing on the deck of a cruise ship, with nothing around but open water, I finally understood what he was trying to describe. At first, there was only a thin band of light on the horizon. Then the sky gradually brightened. A small arc of the sun appeared above the sea. Slowly, it rose higher and higher, casting a golden reflection across the water. No buildings, no traffic, no city noise, just the sound of the waves, the morning breeze, and the rising sun. Perhaps that is why a sunrise at sea feels different. There is a simplicity to it that is difficult to find elsewhere. And perhaps that is one of the most overlooked pleasures of cruising. Sometimes, the most memorable part of the journey is not the next destination. It is simply the experience of being at sea. Of course, there was another benefit to this sunrise. I had it almost entirely to myself. As I stood on the deck, still damp with the moisture of the night air, watching the sun slowly rise from the distant horizon, the rest of the ship seemed to be asleep. A cruise ship carrying thousands of people had become almost unbelievably quiet. Apart from the occasional low, rhythmic hum of the ship's machinery in the distance, and the gentle sound of waves brushing against the hull, there was hardly any other noise. For a brief moment, I almost felt as though I had the entire ship to myself. After watching the sunrise, it was time for breakfast. Unlike dinner, breakfast in the main dining room is much more relaxed. There are no assigned dining times, and no need to return to the same table as the night before. Simply arrive during opening hours, find a seat, and enjoy your meal. The atmosphere is noticeably less formal than dinner service, which is one of the reasons I particularly enjoy breakfast on a cruise. It is also where you can find dishes that are not available in the buffet. For example, eggs Benedict, or its close relative, eggs Florentine. These classic breakfast dishes require a certain amount of preparation and are best made to order, from the poached eggs to the hollandaise sauce. As a result, they are usually found only in the main dining room. And on MSC Poesia, both were surprisingly good. Perfectly poached eggs, rich hollandaise sauce, and a soft English muffin underneath. For me, they were among the highlights of breakfast on this cruise. The buffet, on the other hand, offers a very different experience. Cereals, fruit, salads, bread and pastries, along with the usual selection of hot breakfast items. The overall setup is very similar to what you would find in a typical hotel breakfast buffet. There is plenty of choice. The quality is consistent, but there are fewer surprises. If you simply want a quick and convenient breakfast, the buffet does the job perfectly well. But if time allows, I would recommend heading to the main dining room, ordering a freshly prepared eggs Benedict, and taking your time to enjoy the final morning of the voyage. As MSC Poesia slowly approached Barcelona, the city's skyline gradually came into view. Alongside the familiar sight of other cruise ships, I could also see several naval vessels moored in the harbor. Barcelona is not only one of Europe's busiest cruise ports, but also an important commercial and military port on the Mediterranean. Before leaving the ship, however, there were still a few things to take care of. First, I needed to collect the hand luggage that had been stored earlier that morning. It was also worth checking that all onboard charges had been settled. Most purchases are automatically billed to the credit card linked to your cruise account. But if there are any questions about your bill, guest services is your last opportunity to sort them out before disembarkation. Once everything was in order, it was finally time to leave the ship. Of course, there was one last thing not to forget: the larger suitcases that had been placed outside the cabin door the night before. After leaving the terminal, passengers need to locate the correct luggage collection area. and retrieve their bags using the numbered luggage tags. And just like that, this short 2-day, 1-night cruise had come to an end. As for Barcelona itself, this certainly won't be my last visit. Several future cruises will also be calling it the city. So rather than covering Barcelona and its surrounding areas today, I'll save them for a dedicated vlog in the future. For now, this is where this episode comes to an end.
If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you have any comments, leave it in the comment section below. If you don't like it, share it to your friends. See you next time.